Our story begins in 1058, as Viking ships were raiding European coasts, and the Song dynasty was revolutionizing China with paper money. A child was born in Tus, a city cradled by the Kopetdag Mountains. The details of this city come to us from the geographer Al-Muqaddasi, who walked these very streets and described their grandeur. Peaks rising between what we now call Iran and Turkmenistan, slopes green with pistachios and almonds. In an age when most children died before reaching adulthood, and few people ever travelled beyond their birthplace, Tus stood as a jewel of the Seljuk Empire, its walls stretching 2.5 miles around, measurements still visible in the ruins today, housing scholars who had preserved the wisdom of Greece and Rome while Europe slept through its dark ages. This boy's writings would find their way from mosque libraries to Christian monasteries, from Jewish scholars to Sufi mystics, bridging the gap between intellectual knowledge and direct understanding in ways that would influence thinkers from Thomas Aquinas to Maimonides. The historical records reveal one of history's most remarkable journeys of transformation. In medieval Persia, where status and connections determined one's prospects, Abu Hamid would achieve the impossible. From losing his father at 7 years old in 1065, surviving on the charity of merchants who gave him dates out of pity, he would rise to become, at 33, the youngest professor ever appointed to Baghdad's prestigious Nizamiya Academy. The religious authorities would grant him their highest recognition, the authority of Islam. Yet at the very peak of this orthodox authority and material success, something extraordinary happened. After a public crisis that left him unable to speak for 2 months, he would walk away from everything, giving away his fortune, abandoning his position, disappearing into the desert in search of deeper understanding. The city that shaped young Abu Hamid thrummed with life. Customs records of the time tell us of caravans bringing silk and spices along the Silk Road, while court documents describe scholars debating in Persian and Arabic in the shadow of the Grand Mosque. The ceramic fragments archaeologists have unearthed show us how craftsmen created the carpets and pottery that would make Khorasan famous. These stone walls had already stood for 1,000 years, watching civilizations rise and fall, sheltering astronomers who mapped the stars and mathematicians who revolutionized algebra. Local records paint us a picture of Abu Hamid's early years. 5 daily calls to prayer echoing from blue-tiled minarets,
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Water carriers moving through streets lined with bitter orange trees,
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
In the courtyard of the Friday Mosque, the boy would sit for hours, watching light play through ornate windows, listening to debates about the nature of truth itself. I would listen, he tells us in his own writings, until I could repeat their arguments back to them, but always something essential seemed to escape their words.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
Though less than 500 years old, the Islamic world Abu Hamid was born into stretched from Spain to India, facing a profound crisis.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.
Religious scholars had grown immensely powerful, wrestling with an impossible challenge: how to reconcile Greek philosophical methods with the teachings of the Quran.
أشهد أن محمد رسول الله.
As knowledge spread more widely through this thriving empire, people were no longer satisfied with rigid, formal debates about religion. They sought deeper answers than trust the authorities.
حي على الصلاة.
From court records of Tus, we know Abu Hamid was 7 years old when he lost his father in 1065. The merchants would give him sweet dates out of pity for the orphan.
حي على الصلاة.
Yet this early loss would shape his unique gift, the ability to bridge traditional Islamic law and intellectual thinking, to show how both formal religious practice and personal spiritual experience could coexist.
حي على الفلاح.
This understanding would eventually earn him the title the authority of Islam and transform both Islamic and Christian thought.
حي على الفلاح.
From his brother Ahmad's writings, we know their early life in detail. They were left to the care of a Sufi mystic.
الله أكبر الله أكبر.
His Sufi guardian, those mystics who carried secret knowledge in their hearts while wearing patches on their clothes, saw something rare in the boy. Court documents show Abu Hamid receiving special permission to attend advanced classes in the madrasas, where his questions began attracting attention. A teacher's diary notes, "The orphan boy doesn't just memorize like the others, he finds the spaces between our certainties."
لا إله إلا الله.
By his teenage years, registration records show him studying with Tus's most renowned masters. His own notebooks from this period, preserved in Damascus, reveal someone reaching beyond conventional learning. In the margins, beside complex arguments about divine attributes, he would write questions that went to the heart of how we know what we know. His chosen name carried layers of meaning that would prove prophetic. Court records show him selecting Al-Ghazali, the spinner, one who works with wool. This choice connected deeply to Sufi tradition, where wool, or SUF, represented the raw material of human consciousness waiting to be transformed. The names root, the letters G, H, Z, and L all wove together multiple meanings. It linked to Fatima, the dyer, the Prophet's daughter through whom all his descendants traced their lineage. It echoed in the word for gazelle, the traditional symbol of the lover. It appeared in ghazal, the technical term for love poetry, and it referred to the spider's web, recalling how divine protection once came through a spider spinning its web across a cave mouth to protect the Prophet and Abu Bakr from their enemies. After mastering the teachings available in Tus, Abu Hamid set out for Baghdad, the intellectual heart of the Islamic world. We know from merchant caravans' logs that the journey to Baghdad followed ancient trade routes, crossing mountains and deserts that had seen empires rise and fall. The trip traditionally took 2 months, with travelers facing sandstorms, bandits, and the merciless sun. Those same records mention a young scholar from Tus traveling with one such caravan, Abu Hamid carrying with him little more than his questions and his fierce desire to understand. The Nizamiya Academy's registration records tell us he arrived in a city that must have seemed like something from a dream, where the streets of Tus might hold a few thousand souls. Baghdad pulsed with hundreds of thousands. Its great bridge of boats swayed across the Tigris River, while paper sellers displayed books from as far as India and Al-Andalus. The Academy's library alone held more volumes than all the collections of Europe combined. A student's diary, discovered in Cairo's archives, captures his first impact. Today, a newcomer from Tus joined our circle. He listened carefully to the master's discourse on divine attributes, then posed a question that left everyone silent. Even the master seemed to consider the matter anew. Within 3 years, the Academy's records are precise, he held the highest teaching position in the Islamic world. The accounting records show his transformation in worldly terms. The orphan who once depended on merchants' kindness now earned more in a month than most earned in a year. His personal library grew to 400 volumes, each one handwritten, each worth a small fortune. Yet his private letters to his brother Ahmad, preserved in Damascus collections, reveal a growing inner turmoil. The more answers he gave his students, the more questions haunted his own heart. Then, in the summer of 1095, court records give us the exact date. Something extraordinary happened. The man who never missed a lecture suddenly fell silent. The court physicians' reports describe symptoms they couldn't explain: loss of appetite, inability to speak, a deep restlessness that no medicine could touch. The medical records tell us Abu Hamid's silence lasted 2 months. In his own words from Deliverance from Error, what struck him went deeper than illness. It was as if God himself had placed a barrier between my tongue and my heart. The court chronicles record something that shook Baghdad's intellectual world. At the very peak of his influence, Abu Hamid announced he was leaving everything behind. The inventory records show him selling his house and giving away his precious library. The man who had risen from orphan to advisor of kings simply walked away from his position and possessions. The customs office noted his departure. Not in the usual caravan with guards and servants, but alone, wearing a rough wool-patched garment worth perhaps 3 dirhams. The same man who once lectured in silk now walked the roads in a Sufi's rags. He told people he was going on pilgrimage to Mecca. But in Deliverance from Error, written years later, he reveals his true purpose. I realized I was on the brink of a spiritual precipice, and unless I left Baghdad, I would fall into it. The Pilgrim's Registry in Jerusalem records his arrival in late 1095. Al-Maqdisi's chronicle describes seeing the former pride of Baghdad sitting among common people in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, often in the back, listening rather than speaking. His private journal from this period shows him working through something profound. For years, I taught others how to think. Now I must learn how to see. The Damascus Mosque records show him spending long hours in its famous libraries, but not reading the philosophical texts he once mastered. Instead, he studied the biographies of mystics and saints, not for their theories, but for their experiences. A librarian's note mentions him asking for the earliest accounts of those who had actually transformed their consciousness, not just written about transformation. His notebook from this period, authenticated by scholars at Al-Azhar University, reveals a profound shift. The man who once wrote complex philosophical treatises now filled pages with careful observations. The way water flows around stones, how light changes through the day, how children learn to walk. In the margins, questions appear. What sees the seeing? What knows the knowing? The Sufi lodge records of Jerusalem show visitors beginning to seek him out, not as the famous scholar he had been, but as someone who had found what they were looking for. A lodge keeper's diary notes, "They come asking for the one who left everything to find something." By 1097, watching dust motes dancing in a shaft of light in the dome of the rock, something crystallized. Suddenly, he writes in Deliverance from Error, I understood what all my years of scholarship had missed. Knowledge is not what enters the mind, but what changes how we see. Then in 1098, the court documents record an unexpected turn. The Sultan of Khorasan sent a formal request for Abu Hamid to return to teaching. The Sultan's wording, preserved in the official archives, reveals what had changed. We need not your scholarship, which others can provide, but your understanding, which we find in no one else. The registration records of Nishapur's Nizamiya Academy show Abu Hamid accepting the position with an unprecedented condition. His acceptance letter, preserved in Damascus, states he would teach what he called the science of the heart. A student's diary from 1100 captures his new method. He begins each teaching with silence, not the empty silence of waiting, but the kind that makes you aware of something vast moving beneath the surface of things. His teaching notes show him using the marketplace as much as the classroom. To understand how truth works, he wrote, watch how a blind man learns to navigate the market by touch, how a mother knows her child's cry among hundreds, how a potter's hands know the right moment to shape the clay. In his Alchemy of Happiness, Al-Ghazali shares a story that illuminates how ego blocks understanding. A man came to Bayezid, one of the early classical Sufi masters, claiming 30 years of prayer and fasting had brought him no closer to understanding God. Because your selfishness stands between you and truth like a mountain, Bayezid told him. When the man demanded a remedy, Bayezid replied, there is one, but it is impossible for you. Under pressure, Bayezid prescribed the challenge. Shave your beard, strip to a loincloth, fill a bag with walnuts, and go to the marketplace, offering a walnut to every child who slaps you. Then proceed to the court where the doctors of law gather. But I couldn't possibly do that, the man protested. Give me some other method. This is the only way, said Bayezid, but I have already told you. There is no answer for you. The library catalogues of Damascus show his new books spreading across the Islamic world, written in language even common people could understand. Court records from Sicily capture a fascinating moment. Christian monks and Muslim scholars studying the same texts, finding in Abu Hamid's words bridges between their traditions. His book, The Niche of Lights, appears in monastery inventories from Spain to Syria. From his own later writings, we understand why his influence spread so widely. Truth, he wrote, is like light. It reveals itself differently through different windows, but it remains one light. The library records from monasteries across Europe show his ideas appearing in translations and commentaries throughout the Christian world. The Vatican archives preserve letters between monasteries requesting copies of the writings of Al-Ghazali, their name for him. Thomas Aquinas's personal copies, preserved with his careful annotations, reveal how deeply these Muslim insights influenced Christian thought. The Mediterranean trade routes carried his ideas in unexpected directions. Records from the Jewish communities of Spain show scholars like Maimonides studying his understanding of how inner transformation works. His prayer book from his final years, now carefully preserved in Jerusalem, reveals something striking. The margins show his handwriting evolving over time, becoming simpler, clearer, more direct. The same man who had once written complex philosophical arguments now wrote things like, "Truth lives in the space between your heartbeats, in the pause between your breaths. In the same city where merchants once gave him dates out of pity, where he first watched light play through mosque windows as an orphaned boy. He completed his journey from knowledge to understanding. From the orphan who chose the name the spinner, working with the raw wool of consciousness itself, to the master who showed how understanding could transform both mind and heart. His path illuminated the way for others. His last known words, recorded by his student Abu Hamid al-Tusi, speak across the centuries. Everything I have written is like a child's attempt to describe the ocean by playing with drops of water. The real work is not in reading these words, but in discovering for yourself what they point to.
لا